All right, hello, and welcome to the Responsive Classroom Valuing Culture Diversity webinar. My name is Michelle Benson, and I am the Chief Professional Learning Officer at the Center for Responsive Schools, and I will be your moderator for this evening. Before we go into our presentation tonight, we're going to take a moment for our panelists to introduce themselves. Our panel guests, please share your name, your school location, grade level that you teach, or grade levels that you have taught, or if you're not in the classroom, your role. I'll have Earl Hunter introduce himself first.
There we go. Hi, everyone. My name is Earl Hunter II. I come from Los Angeles, California. I am currently a consulting teacher for Responsive Classroom, in addition to doing some educational consulting as well. I was a classroom teacher for 20 years, only now, this is my second year outside of the classroom. I taught third, fourth, and fifth grades in both public and private settings in Los Angeles. And now I just spread the joy that is Responsive Classroom to teachers and schools all over the country.
Thank you, Earl. Christine?
Hi, I'm Christine Lewis, and I'm in Maryland. I'm currently in a private school, St. Andrew's Episcopal, and I've been an educator in the elementary division for about 20 years. And for the last 5 years, I've been a Responsive Classroom consulting teacher. And I've taught K1, 2, 3, and 4 in my time. I'm excited to be here.
Ina?
Good evening, everyone. Happy to be here with you all. My name is Ina Pinnell St. Cyrin, and I am a New York City public school teacher. I've been teaching for about 28 years in elementary school classrooms as a special education teacher, in both self-contained settings and also in integrated co-teaching or team teaching settings as well, which is where I'm currently teaching. I'm teaching in a partnership with a general ed teacher, and we're both there full time, and we have general ed and special ed students in the classroom. And during the summers, my role is as a consulting teacher for Responsive Classroom, and also my newest role as of the beginning of this school year is as an ambassador for the Fly 5 program.
Congratulations, Ina. Duke?
Hi, my name is Duke Ammon. I'm actually not an educator. I work on the back end at Center for Responsive Schools. And I'm just here as a resource in case anyone has any questions about specifically booking us for professional development or anything in that nature. I will be putting my email over in the chat, so if you want to reach out to me there, you'll have that available.
Thank you, Duke. Katie?
Hi, everyone. I'm Katie Potter. I am the Senior Literacy Manager at Lee & Low Books. Lee & Low is the largest children's book publisher specializing in diversity in the United States, and we're celebrating our 30th year anniversary. I am a former teacher myself. I was also an educational researcher for quite a few years, and this is my 5th year at Lee & Low, and as the Senior Literacy Manager, I develop all of our educator guides, our resources. I conduct our professional development and webinars on diverse children's literature. And so I'm happy to be a resource for anyone who has questions about our titles or how to customize any of our books for your school.
Thank you, Katie. And Brooke?
Hi, I'm Brooke Martineau. I'm an educational partnership consultant with the Center for Responsive Schools. I'm also a former educator. Like Duke, I'm a partnership consultant. So if you're interested in bringing Responsive Classroom to your school or seeing what the next step is in your Responsive Classroom journey, I'm happy to help you. I'll also throw my email in the chat.
Thank you, Brooke. Thank you, panelists. So tonight's conversation is about valuing cultural diversity. And so I want us to take a moment to just really think about what cultural diversity means. So according to Webster's definition, it is the existence of a variety of culture or ethnic groups within a society, which in terms, we can relate this to multiculturalism. So Dr. Lisa D. Belfield is an adjunct professor at the Purdue Global Human Services Department, and she published an article and research from sociologist Dr. Khalid Rosado, who specializes in diversity and multiculturalism. And this sociologist describes 7 important actions involved in the definition of multiculturalism. So the first characteristic is recognizing the abundant diversity of culture, respect for the differences, acknowledging the validity of different cultural expressions and contributions, valuing what other cultures offer, encouraging the contributions of diverse groups, empowering people to strengthen themselves and others to achieve their maximum potential by being critical of their own biases. And lastly, celebrating rather than just tolerating the differences in order to bring about unity through our diversity. So tonight, our panel guests will be sharing their stories and their experiences from classrooms, from being a literacy facilitator, and also just embracing and being able to provide students all over the world the opportunity to engage in conversations and actions about the value of diversity. And though I feel that this webinar is very timely, obviously during the month of February, but valuing cultural diversity should be intentional, and it should be taught daily. All right, so let's get started. Before we go into our question, I would like to remind everyone that the chat box, our panelists will be engaging with you by sending you links or websites for you to click on and to view those resources. And if you have any questions, please utilize the Q&A box. All right. So the first question to the panelists is, what is one of the most important things that you feel educators should keep in mind when it comes to diversity?
Well, I'd like to take that one first. One of the things that I know is really important that everyone really understands about diversity is that every student in every school building deserves to see themselves in the curriculum, in the environment, and as a valued member of the community. Cultural diversity it's undeniable. There's no one person in any school building that is just one type. It just comes from one culture, right? And I think in contemporary times, we've moved away from that sort of melting pot analogy, because we're not all just one melted mix of things. We're more like a salad bowl. And in a salad bowl, right, each of those flavors is what makes the whole salad really rich and amazing. And so students need to not only see themselves, but they also need to feel seen. And a student feels seen when the literature that they read represents them, but not only just them, their peers, their aunts and uncles, the members of the community, the crossing guard, all of those, the diversity that exists in the world suggests, in the natural world, suggests that that's what this world was built for. You go to any wooded area, you don't see one type of tree. You don't see one type of plant. And so in any curriculum, in the images on the walls, in paintings, I know I've gone to schools where there are these beautiful historical paintings that are not indicative of the children who roam the halls. And yes, I do believe there's a necessity to to embrace our history, but we also have to move into the future. And children need to feel seen by teachers through an understanding of the cultures that they come from. And again, as someone who's biracial, I'm not going to pick one. I don't want you to just celebrate my Blackness. I want you to know that I have a rich Jewish history, and I want that to be a part of what my classmates experience, the authors that they read, the art that's on the walls that are portrayed in just simple imagery in slides on, in lessons. So if anything that they need to remember is just that everyone deserves to see themselves in their learning space, but also really feel seen by the educators that are leading them.
I mean, I can't. Following Earl is really difficult. And I, of course, was incredibly profound, Earl. I mean, I wholeheartedly agree with everything. And I, as the senior literacy manager at Lee and Low Books, I'm going to talk a little bit about how that all applies to literature. And I really agree with what Earl said about recognizing all parts of our identities. And when you're thinking about a diverse library, it's not just about the racial makeup of your library. Of course, you need to include, you need to be as diverse as possible, but diversity also means that looking at diverse family structures, diverse geographical regions, diverse genres. Are you representing all kinds of genres? Formats. Are you looking at your readers as a whole? Are you looking at what students like to engage with? And that's all diverse. So thinking about your libraries in terms of, also diversity and disability, are you, what does the makeup of your libraries and what do your kids look like in those libraries? So, social identity markers, all kinds of diverse demographics. I encourage you all to think about when you're choosing materials, resources, and books for your students.
I do want to add one more thing also. It's important that we not relegate celebrations of diversity to the celebratory months that society has decided that are worthy of some introspection or celebration of cultures. I love Black History Month. Let's not let it be forgotten that it happens to be the shortest month of the year. And what about every other culture that exists? There's not a Jewish History Month, right? We don't have to wait until celebrations that are on a calendar in order to integrate. Again, you don't eat the carrots and then the lettuce and then the tomatoes when you eat that salad. It's all mixed up in there. And that's what's really important as well, is that we really understand that this has to be a deliberate act. And you know what it requires? It requires purposeful action. It requires research. We live in a technology age where there's nothing in this world that you can't know in minutes. And so find out about the students by asking them questions. They are the authors of their own story. When we write our students' stories, when we disregard the biases that exist in all of us, despite any culture, then we're not taking the opportunity to really be purposeful with giving students what they need.
Michelle, can I just add there, for me as a white educator, when I'm thinking about something that is really important for educators, I'm hearing great ideas of what we should do for our students. But one of the things for me that I kind of hold front and center is the fact that I have to understand my own identity and how it was constructed in order for me to be able to be thoughtful and respond with some kind of awareness and insight to my students. And in my choice making, if I'm blind to my own cultural makeup and how that informs my thinking in the moment, then I might have the best of intentions, but I still might make choices that are ultimately in some small way doing harm because I'm discounting some kind of cultural truth because I'm blind to it. So I just want to add in, yes, we need to work with our students, but as an educator, I also have to be working on my own self.
Absolutely, Christine. And I also just want to go back and piggyback off of what Katie and Earl was saying about being able to provide literature or text that represents our students. And as a former middle school teacher, 7th grade, 13 and 14-year-olds, or 12 and 13-year-olds, sometimes 14, it was all about motivation and building that connection. And so again, when we know who we are and we know who our students are, understanding their culture, understanding the various types of diversities we have in our classrooms. And obviously this goes beyond just race. I mean, there's so many other types of diversities that we're going to talk about today or this evening, but motivation is that. When we truly begin to know them, we will motivate them to be those learners that we inspire them to be. Is there anyone else on the panel that would like to give insight to this question before we move on? So what are some ways in which you work to incorporate students' unique backgrounds, ideas, and perspectives into the classroom community so that everyone feels welcome?
Thanks, Michelle. So I'll start off with this one. And we have, I'm going to share some links in the chat to guide our thinking. So at Lee and Low Books, we have what we call our classroom library questionnaire. And this has been used, this is a tool that has been used nationwide as a way to assess what's in your library and sometimes most importantly, what's not in your library. And this is by no means a checklist. It's not, we never want teachers or educators to feel guilty. And we know that you're all working with incredibly limited budgets. And especially with the pandemic, what's available virtually is completely different. However, it's just a conversation starter to think about assessing what's in your library. And it's essentially a classroom audit. And we have had educators work with their students. We had in Virginia, there was a 5th grade educator who really got her students involved in looking at all of the titles and figuring out, how we can improve and how we can represent most importantly, the students in the classroom and the world at large. So this is a way to guide your thinking and to just get you started. And I also have a link that has, hopefully everyone can see it. And this is a link to several of our webinars, our book lists, where we talk a lot about these topics about incorporating students' backgrounds. And of course, at Lee and Low, as the largest children's book publisher specializing in diversity, we have incredibly rigid editorial guidelines as to what we acquire and what we publish. So first and foremost, we center people, BIPOC people are the center of our stories. We also actively seek manuscripts. We're actively seeking manuscripts that are celebrating the joy of everyday life. While we're very proud of our biographies of our unsung heroes, it is so critical to show BIPOC kids doing everyday things, having fun, enjoying themselves, being with their families. And so that is a huge push that we're doing right now in the publishing industry. The second link did not work. Okay, I will work on that. So that's what I wanted to say about incorporating students' backgrounds, you can learn a lot about your students by doing this with them, and by inviting them to share their favorite stories, or maybe most importantly, what they're not seeing in the books and what they want to see, and working with your school librarian, working with your public librarian, and just getting them involved in any way that you can with books. Like Michelle said, it's all about engagement, and this is the perfect way to start.
One of the ways that I've incorporated the unique backgrounds of students into the classroom has been that I made a decision several years ago that the walls of my classroom were going to belong to my students and not to me. And as they built trust that I was going to support them to use the walls to showcase their identities and to showcase their learning, my students became more and more willing to really to bring themselves and show themselves in my classroom. So that's one of the things that that I felt made a huge difference, was when I gave up my anchor chart space and my teacher writing cue space. And if the children needed an anchor chart, then they made the anchor chart with my help. But so I'm guiding what's on the walls. It's all appropriate for school, but I'm not driving it. And that was one way that I found that my students were able to fill their learning space with their own identities.
And I'd like to add on to offer that allowing children the opportunity to just share their stories, to reveal to us, some of the things that are unique about their backgrounds and their cultures, is yet another way. And as Michelle was saying before, not just, a culture because it's tied to a place, but it could be a culture based on your gender. That a child might be willing to share. We have children who are coming from all kinds of backgrounds and families as well. We have children coming from same-sex marriages, children who are transgender now, who are all making their way into the education system. And they need to be also acknowledged and validated and celebrated for the joys of the way they experience life as well. And then another thing that I also like to do with my students is project-based learning. I love to have them engage in some opportunities where they get to do research on their own, that they get to create and express themselves in a very creative way that allows them the opportunity to make some choices about how they want to express themselves and their learning and direct it.
I have to agree with both of you, Christine and Ina. It really is about letting kids bring themselves into the classroom. And in my own classrooms for years, I found there are so many different ways that you can do that. One thing that I did in the last few years of my time in the classroom was to reimagine homework. I reimagined homework in ways that people the parents were somewhat surprised by, because I had students call grandparents and elders in their family and ask them stories that are not written down, and to record those stories and to share those stories, those individual stories. This is Black History Month, and Black History Month goes long and far beyond Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and Rosa Parks. There's Black history that's made in every single Black family, right? How many of your students know who the first person was in their family to go to college? That's Black history for that family. How to have students bring in artifacts from their cultures as just to have in the classroom. Students spend as much or even more time in our classrooms Monday through Friday than they do at home awake. And so the classrooms should feel like a second home. I spent some time at the UCLA Lab School years ago at a workshop. And I was in awe by how the classrooms looked more like living rooms than they did classrooms. And one of the things that I took from that is I had students at the beginning of every year bring in framed pictures of themselves and their families in their spaces, in their celebrations, and we hung them on the wall. And so when you talk about students seeing themselves, sometimes that can be just as literal as seeing themselves and their families on the walls. That's what's going to create that safety that will then allow them the freedom to explore who they are. Because some of them with those stories, some of those stories that came back from grandparents and great-grandparents were stories that these children never knew about their families. And so then not only are we enriching the community with the shared stories, but we're enriching children's lives by helping them to honor and recognize their own cultures, things that they didn't know.
And also to add on to that, Earl, is allowing the students to reveal their identities through just their names. You know, what do their names signify in their cultures? How did they get their names? You know, that is helping the students to understand that they have a sense of belonging in that classroom space, and that they're significant because, you know, we value the story of how you got your name, how you came to be. What's the story behind that?
Also, how to pronounce students' names. And that one, it seems like that one is a no-brainer. But I not too long ago, I heard a story from a teacher that at the end of a school year, when she was bidding farewell to her students, a student, this was a middle school teacher, just said to her, "Hey, by the way, my name is pronounced this way." And the teacher was dumbfounded, felt incredibly sad because that student never actually felt empowered enough to correct her. Also, the many ways that students hyphenate or abbreviate their names for the sake of ease of American culture to pronounce. We've got some really strange named streets and areas of towns in every city that we have no problem pronouncing. So let's spend the time asking students to help them to pronounce their names right. I know one teacher who created a Flipgrid in the beginning of the year and had families just simply share how to pronounce all of the family members' names. They felt empowered.
Wow, something so small, but so large and so important. And being able to recognize someone by their name and putting forth the effort to acknowledge how to pronounce it is very empowering. So I really appreciate the panel for speaking their truths on this particular question and giving some really cool ideas to our educators that are listening in on this webinar. Any other additional responses? All right. So how do you use your knowledge of cultures and backgrounds in your classroom or school community to support learning? And what are some of the ideas or strategies that you implement?
Well, Michelle, as a white educator, it's been so important for me to actively seek that understanding and the knowledge of the cultural experiences of my students. Also, I'm not American, so it's been essential that I actively do that. We know that as humans, our default is to be able to interpret the cues that we get from people who look like us. And it takes effort and intentional practice to be able to reach beyond that and interpret cues coming from people who don't look like us. And so one of the ways that I use my knowledge of the cultures and backgrounds of my students is I try to think of that as the fertile ground upon which I can design learning experiences that are going to speak more closely to who they are as people. And what I really want to do is leverage the assets that they are bringing from their own, that central part of their identity that's connected to culture. And so, like, on a practical level, in my elementary classroom, that might look like me planning to do more interactive learning structures. If I know that I have a cohort where a large number of my students come from a cultural background that values community and conversation, so then I integrate that more, and then that allows for a deeper level of thinking about new concepts. Or if I know that there are students in my class who have a cultural experience with storytelling and oral history, then I might choose to elevate that as I'm planning for the topics of study. I'm also at the same time thinking of how I can bring these cultural assets in and make them come alive. So, like, as an academic choice option, I might include the opportunity for students to bring their backgrounds to the forefront by creating choices, say art, music, whatever cultural elements that they have, they can bring into their reading practice, their writing practice, and other aspects of learning. So this is one of the ways that I use the information.
And I'd like to add on to Christine, if I may, that in addition to the responsive classroom practices of academic choice and interactive learning structures, you have a daily morning meeting where, there are several opportunities to allow children to bring their cultures in and share them with others through the language. You could do a foreign language greeting, and have the children teach us how to greet in that particular foreign language. Again, there's the sharing component of a morning meeting that's also very important. Activities could be a game that they enjoyed playing when, at home or in their native countries, or maybe if they're not even in their native countries, just something that they've learned that has been passed down culturally. Any kind of activity like that is really important. I'm sorry about that. It's really important in helping the children to express and feel that their cultures are significant and part of the life of the classroom, and feeling that sense of belonging.
And Ina, I know you mentioned morning meeting, and I just want to, just mention responsive advisory meetings for our middle schools folks that are out there. The exact same goals and purpose of morning meeting is similar to advisory for our adolescents.
While we have such a rich library of publications at Center for Responsive Schools that really support morning meeting, we have lots of ideas how to integrate different strategies and practices into, whether they're academic or not. We also have, like Christine asserted, we have the ability to seek information, to find, and it's great to do. That 88 Energizers book was torn and tattered by the time my classroom career was over. But I also found games like El Trompo that we play in Mexico with my kids, or there's such richness in play that exists in other cultures. And so let's bring that play into our classrooms, and not just for the students that are represented in our classroom, but across the school. There may be a student in another grade that's from a country that's not represented in our grade, but we certainly can teach about it. We can certainly share. We can have them come in, right? We do great jobs of having our sixth graders read books with our first graders. Well, maybe they could teach them a game. Maybe they can share some of that oral history, right? Because that's, as someone just said, play is a child's work, and that's how we learn. And play happens everywhere. And we'd be surprised at also the history of some of the games that we play that we call American games. They certainly don't, they didn't originate here. And it makes me think of this, also the fact that when we do that research, let's make sure we learn to play those games correctly. I can't tell you how many times I sit at a table with kids playing Mancala and have to teach them the correct way to play Mancala. It's not just throwing a bunch of beads, but I mean, it's great, but kids think Mancala is a game from Target. Do they know the thousands of year history that a game like that made it all its way, made it its way all the way to Target? It has deep roots. Some of the songs and how songs weren't just things that we listened to, but they were songs we used as communication tools. All cultures, I'm not talking about just Negro spirituals and how they impacted sometimes safety and escape from harm, but there are songs that speak messages to elders. We live on a land that was not our own. And whether the culture is represented in your classroom, everyone, beyond just that third grade Native American unit, everyone should understand deeply the land that we are now treading on. And so all of those things are important that we incorporate. And that's how we can really use backgrounds, not only the students, but just the land's background.
I have to say, beyond how I'm functioning with my students, having that knowledge and having actively gained more understanding of what you're talking about, the place and the history and the what goes into the whole identity of culture for my students, it has changed the way I write my reports and the way that I frame how I communicate about my students with their families and with the people who care for them, which includes me. And so I just wanted to throw in there that is another layer to the puzzle. It's not just how we're integrating and interacting with our students, it's also how we're interacting with the larger community and partnering with the parents in that way. And having that lens of culture has really helped me asset frame and bring their assets to the forefront so that then we can have a realistic conversation about everything we need to do to set your child up for success academically. But I just wanted to throw in there that is something that I use this knowledge for in my larger community.
I think I would just like to add in that there is a real value in community partnerships and helping to support the children and our knowledge of the children's cultural backgrounds. Because a lot of times there's an expertise that comes out of a partnership with a museum, or with, musicians, artists, that can enrich and help support and help accentuate, a child's cultural background and what your knowledge is of it. One of my earlier partnerships, probably in 2016, was with Lee and Low Books. I was amazed, that there was a publisher that had so many multicultural books about children and their backgrounds, that I didn't have to do all this vetting, that they did it for me. Plus, then they gave the lesson plans and the activities that, I then incorporated. So then I was crossing over using the books from Lee and Low into social studies, into current events, into our writing and our reading. And so there's a real value in, just seeking out those community partnerships, because a lot of times they offer free programming or low cost programming that, might be something that will really enhance, what you can bring out in your classroom and help support a child's culture.
So before we move on to our next question, we do have some questions in our Q&A, and I would like to just address them with the panel. One of the questions, and this is for anyone on the panel to just jump in and to respond. But the first one is, during this time when racial justice teaching strategies are being attacked by many local school boards nationwide for multitude of reasons, what words of encouragement do you have for teachers to stay the course in the face of resistance?
Well, I'd like to start with that. For me, I think that it's more dangerous that we don't allow everybody to have cultural equity in their classrooms. It limits the way that we can view and take perspectives on the world around us. And so just for that simple reason alone, being able to embrace cultural diversity is really an asset in our classrooms. And I know that there's a lot of resistance and pushback across the country and even the world about doing things like that. But one way that I like to do it when feeling the resistance is to go to primary and secondary sources. If I can pull up Christopher Columbus's diary, and present it to the children translated, and they can read it and then say, wait a minute, I'm not so sure that when he arrived here, that he was all that friendly with the indigenous people, because he said such and such and such and such about them, right? And so they can then get the opportunity to question on their own because they've had a primary or secondary source in front of them. They get to do that questioning on their own. I'm just presenting something that is part of history and is factual. And then when they get to question, I remember when I did it this year, one of my students said, well, why didn't our second grade teachers tell us about this? What did they think, that we couldn't handle the truth? And I was just like blown away. So that told me that the kids want to know this. They don't want to be, to have a learning environment where it's not honest, it's not authentic. They want that. And they are right to be seeking that and demanding that. So I think there's a real value in bringing it in those kinds of ways. If you're feeling the resistance about, celebrating cultural diversity, it's just giving them some primary and secondary sources and let them do their own investigation.
I totally agree, Ina. And I wanted to really quickly mention that we did a Black Lives Matter webinar in schools with Lelenia Garcia and Karen Davidson of our What We Believe, with Jesse Hagopian and Denisha Jones from the Black Lives Matter in School. And so what Lelenia had mentioned, that she wrote this book and she uses it, I'm going to share it in the chat, and she uses it with her early childhood. And a lot of people pushed back, my kids can't engage with this. This is way over their head. And she always, I will never forget it, she said, point people to your school motto. What is your school's motto? Schools have slogans, and usually they're about equity, they're about empathy, they're about kindness. So you can kind of redirect it and say, this is what our school's philosophy is. And I'm preaching and showing that in my classroom. And so I just encourage you all to think about that and really get to, and some people don't even know their school's motto or slogan, but this is a great time to get to know it because you can use it in your defense.
And Katie, to your point, I have often done a lot of investigation into the schools that I taught at, and the motto, and or mission statements. And it is really important that we take some time to look within to make sure that the theory and the practice, the walk and the talk of mission statements, of mottos, are congruent. If the walk and the talk are not congruent, then you have a divergent situation, and no amount of diversity is going to fix that, because diversity is, as we said at the top of this discussion, diversity, while we are focusing specifically on cultural diversity, even within cultures. I know my friend Ina is from New York, and I've done a lot of work in New York. And let me tell you something. Brooklyn and the Bronx, Manhattan, and Staten Island, they might as well be different countries because they are vastly different. And so as a Black New Yorker, it depends on where you're from, because if you're from Harlem, you're not like you're from Brooklyn. And so again, the importance is really understanding the depth that exists within diversity, right? Because that's regional diversity that impacts one's cultural diversity, right? That impacts one's cultural experience. I know down in Fayetteville, North Carolina, it is a lot different than it is in Los Angeles, California, or Dallas, Texas. Yet I might share a cultural connection, like phenotypically, with my friends Ina and Michelle. Our experiences are vastly different. And so we have to honor that as well. Because diversity is it's like the forest. There's so much, and there's so many little details that really make up this beautiful thing that is our human culture.
And just super quick before we move on, I just wanted to add that even if we're in a situation, I'm just outside Washington, D.C., so even if we're in a situation where we're feeling that pressure, I love the idea, Resmaa Menakem has this idea of embodied antiracism. And so I even if I'm feeling pressure about, well, you can't do this and you shouldn't say that and you shouldn't do this, I still possess my own self, and I can still embody a position where I personally will communicate my own value of other cultures other than my own, and within my being. So even though we might be under pressure, there are ways we can embody this. We can have a posture where we are supporting our students, no matter what their culture or background or identity is.
I'll take one more question. And Christine, this question is actually for you. And so it is, Carrie wrote, I am curious as to what types of things are displayed in that space. So this was going back
when they own the walls.
Yeah.
So it could be, it could be writing work that they do in class, which I create options for them where they can show who they are in their writing, say, or it could just be pictures that they draw. It could be items that they bring from home, like photographs of their families, or and I feel that my job is to make what they produce look good. So I help them, right? I help them, make the room theirs. But yes, it'll be work from in the classroom. It'll be just spontaneous work that they do. One year I had 4 children who came in before class, asked for a big sheet of paper, and did a beautiful graffiti message for everybody, and then that lives on the wall. It was a really uplifting, positive message that they were creating for their classmates. And so really it is and if they needed an anchor chart to remind them what a period is, where the comma goes, then they create that and they put that up. But it is about, for me, it was about letting go of thinking that the walls belonged to me and this is my domain, and allowing the students to drive what is out there. Now, as responsive classroom educators, we are constantly guiding and coaching our students toward positive social messages that their collective culture embodies. So there's nothing on the wall that is derogatory or hurtful to any member of the community. But yes, wide range, and it changes. It, like, the landscape changes as the students' area of interest changes.
Thank you, Christine. All right. What are some challenges you have had to navigate when working to acknowledge and celebrate cultural diversity in your classroom or school community? And how did you overcome these challenges?
I'd like to lead with this question. There have been many challenges. We just talked about resistance, when you're trying to teach and promote a culturally diverse and culturally equitable environment in your classroom. But in addition to that, we have currently in my class a trilingual class where there are parents whose first language isn't English. We have Arabic and we have Spanish, and then we have English. And while I can pretty much feel comfortable with the translation in Spanish, I don't in Arabic. And so I think that, these translations might be something that can feel like a challenge, especially if you don't understand or know how to speak the language. So to get past that, I can go to other grown-ups, other teachers, adults in the community, in the school community, and ask them if I'm using a translation service, whether or not the translation is coming out right and things being said accurately. And I make sure that I translate each and every email, each and every message that goes home. So usually when I'm doing that, I have to have 3 windows open, with the translation service going. So that's one thing that can be a bit of a challenge. I think that another one that I've heard other teachers as well speak about is finding resources when they do want to promote cultural equity in their classrooms. And I think that there are, nowadays in contemporary times, a lot more websites that have been publishing, lesson plans and activities and guides. And that all you need to do is really just type in a search on cultural diversity, and a lot of them will come up. A lot of very reputable, like Learning for Justice and is an education project. There'll be a number of them, Lee and Low Books, We Need Diverse Books, Responsive Classroom, Fly 5. I mean, there'll be so much that comes up in a search for that you don't have to feel like as though you're at a loss for finding resources when you want to promote the cultures of your classroom. And I also think another thing is when you are studying cultures is to center joy, because so many cultures have had trauma in their existence in life, and it can be very you can walk a very thin line when you're talking about a culture and a child becomes traumatized hearing about the struggles that the culture has been through. So be sure to be accentuating the joy that has existed in the culture. For many Blacks in this country, slavery was a very traumatic, horrific experience, but there was joy in slavery. There are many stories of times of joy and feelings of joy. So even in that, just celebrate that. Go around and find people that you can bring into your classroom that represent the culture, and have them come in and speak to the children. Tomorrow morning, as a matter of fact, we're doing our Black Lives Matter principal, Black Women, and our principal is a Black woman. And so we have her and her mother coming to be interviewed to our classroom. The mother doesn't live in New York, so she's going to Zoom in with us. But, find opportunities to have people that can come into the classroom, and speak authentically and honestly about the various cultures that might be existing in your class. And then also those community partnerships on that same segue, museums, libraries, historic centers, publishers, they all can, add a wealth, of information and support anything that you might want to be doing in your classroom that is, centering cultural diversity. And always keep front and center in your mind that 2 things for me, that cultures unite. racism divides, but cultures unite us. And so anytime that somebody's sharing a culture, it's a way of really having an opportunity to be united together in a collectivistic kind of way. And one thing that my brother always used to tell me was, Ina, when you cross over the threshold of your classroom, that's sacred space. And so guard your sacred space. Make sure that you are protecting your students, your families, yourself in that space that's sacred. And sometimes that might mean that you have to close your door and just teach. Sometimes that's sometimes the reality of things.
I know we're running out of time, but I know one thing is one of those challenges that really presents itself daily is ignorance. We take that word as sort of like a really bad thing. And it's not people sort of being, well, it is. It's people being ignorant. And being ignorant means you just don't know. It's lack of knowledge. And so it's taking the time to inform oneself of different cultural experiences. I know right now, someone in this world may have taken what Ina just said, that there was joy in slavery. Let me tell you something. That joy that came from slavery is on every Black family stove. It's in cast iron skillets. It's in the oral history, the oral cookbooks, the recipes that aren't written down, that grandmas and aunts and uncles and grandpas made over the years. There is joy. And I really appreciate, Ina, that you brought that out. Because again, I think our ignorance allows us to only believe that it's the trauma that informed who we are. And we are not just informed by the trauma. We experience joy, all cultures, every day, right? Cultures are as much about celebrations as they are about navigating the trauma that they've endured. And by the way, every culture has endured some level of trauma. And so I think if we start looking at the things that connect us, like you said, rather than the things that make us different, we'd find that there are probably the vast majority of our experiences, we have something in common rather than the few things that set us apart.
And celebrate opportunities to have those courageous conversations with the children. This, as Earl was saying, this takes work. This is work, and we have work to do. And, children want to be able to talk about these things. They don't want to feel like as though history has been misrepresented to them. They want to know the truth, and they're going to hold you accountable if you don't share those truths with them. They don't want to, hear just one perspective. They want to hear, the stories of everybody.
It took us hundreds of years to get here. We cannot just figure it out, in 2022. But it does take the work.
And I think we're not building on that, but just to reiterate, we have to be brave and have sometimes uncomfortable conversations with our peers, with our families, with our and be willing to hear uncomfortable conversations from our students. And I think that's where, I think of myself as like, sometimes I think I have to get up, put my big girl pants on and go to work and be brave and step into that discomfort and thank my peers when they push back and challenge me, because without those conversations, the culture of the whole building will not change. For me, it's not enough just from my little classroom to transform. I truly want it to filter throughout the whole institution and beyond.
Thank you, panelists. I can sit here and listen to you all night. This has been so inspiring, so empowering for me to be here to listen to your experiences, to listen to your stories, and to be able to understand how you are sharing or receiving students and empowering them and inspiring them within their own cultures. This has been an amazing, absolutely informative conversation, and I look forward to us continuing this conversation as we continue to live and we continue to, go into our schools and districts. And again, not just think about this as being February for Black history or March for women's history or November for Native American history, just every day living and embracing the diversity that we all experience just as one unit. So thank you all for coming out and listening to our webinar. Duke, if you wanted to put in your information in the chat, you can do so at this time. But I want to say thank you, everyone, and good night.